Hello, everyone, and welcome to Third Thursday. It's our NDPTC monthly program. And today is January 18th. For today, our guest speaker is John Chin. John represents the Hawaii State Energy Office, where he manages the Resilience, Clean Transportation, and Analytics Department. Today, he'll be covering critical infrastructure assessment. And with that said, John, I'll let you go ahead and take it away.
Great, thank you. Let me just share my screen. And you see that?
Yes.
All right. Thank you again. Sorry, gotta move these windows around. I'm excited to talk today about our Advanced Assistance project, which actually just concluded in October of last year, after about a year and a half of work. The Advanced Assistance project was funded by FEMA Hazard Mitigation Grant Funds, and we worked pretty closely with a contractor, ICF. So just to kind of explain a little bit about what advanced assistance projects are, it's a type of project, and they're typically used to collect the necessary data to develop more complete hazard mitigation applications. And so in this regard, we wanted data that could support us to pursue funding through large annual funding programs such as BRIC, which is a FEMA program, Building Resilience, Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, which is funded at approximately 5% of the cost of all disasters nationwide. So last year it was funded at over $2 billion, and we expect it to be a large piece of funding moving forward as well. So we really wanted to leverage this project to help with a number of related efforts and desired outcomes. And the first one is to develop a common operating picture. And so a common operating picture is a shared integrated view of relevant information that enables multiple parties to have a common understanding of a situation or operational environment. And so this is useful for us in emergency response. So the State Energy Office has a role as the primary and coordinating agency for Emergency Support Function 12, which is energy. But we also regularly update the state's energy security plan. And so this work could help us do that. And then finally, it helps to prioritize energy resilience investments. So as an example, we've been pursuing GRIP, which is Grid Resilience Innovation Partnerships funding that's in the IIJA. And then we also have some funding through 40101D for grid resilience as well. So as we collect this information, we can use it then to prioritize how we make investments to modernize and make more resilient our grid. Second, we really wanted to develop a tool that helps to visualize this common operating picture. And so for this project, one of the primary outcomes was what we're calling the Geospatial Decision Support System, or GDSS. And it's essentially a map of the energy system, where assets are geospatially. But then the more novel part of it is that it also shows the interdependencies, not only between energy system nodes, but also it shows the dependencies of community lifelines on the energy system. And so if you're not familiar with the FEMA concept of community lifelines, got an image here on the right-hand side. These show some of the main sectors that are considered the most fundamental services really in the community that enable all aspects of society to function. And of course, you can see energy is one of them. Something that we looked at closely and tried to model the project after is the Department of Homeland Security's Infrastructure Resiliency Planning Framework. And as I run through kind of the high level sections of the project, this follows again the DHS framework. So here's a high level look. So first, we undertook an inventory of both critical energy infrastructure, or CEI, which you'll hear me say plenty, and also the Community Lifeline Key Customers, or CLKC, on Oahu, with the primary goal to define the system linkages and dependencies. Next, we conducted a risk assessment evaluating natural and non-natural hazards, potential risks to the energy infrastructure. Like I said, we created the GDSS to map all assets and view both the results of the risk assessment and to visualize the dependencies defined as part of the inventory. And finally, after we've done the risk assessment, we needed to address those risks. So what are the results of the risk assessment? And can we identify and prioritize risk mitigation measures and then translate that into an implementation plan? So first, I'll start talking a little bit about the inventory. The inventory with the energy sector companies, the CEI that you see on the left-hand side, we met and had meetings in person with these entities. All of them own infrastructure on Oahu. This includes HECO, the electric system infrastructure owner, oil and gas infrastructure owners, so the refinery, liquid fuel terminals, and pipelines, and also Hawaii Gas. We asked them questions about their facilities, connectivity and interdependencies, including customers served and their system constraints. We also asked them if they're undertaking similar risk assessments internally and what hazards were of most concern to them and what elements of their infrastructure were most vulnerable. On the right-hand side, these are the CLKC. As you can see, it's a broad group, including government facilities such as emergency operations centers, fire and police stations, medical facilities, water and wastewater. And since there are so many parties involved, we utilized a survey, an online survey, to gather information. And we also worked through some centralized partners in each sector to help push out the survey. And on the survey, we wanted to understand more about their energy service providers, any backup service capacity that they might have, and then overall energy usage. So actually, hold on. So once we had an inventory of both the CEI and the CLKC, we wanted to understand again, the dependencies. So this includes how the energy sector is interdependent, like how the refinery is critical for providing fuels to power plants, or how substations and transmission lines are key to providing power to liquid fuel terminals. But it also included linking elements of the electric system to serving CLKC power needs. And then also, we wanted to prioritize CLKC as it would be a key element later on in the risk assessment. So we wanted to bucket them into high, medium, and low priorities. And we did this via an analysis that drew out likely service territories and intersected these polygons with both population and social vulnerability index data sets. For the risk assessment, this was done just for the CEI, and we used a standard methodology. So exposure times sensitivity times consequence equals risk. In this case, exposure is specific to the location and reflects the probability of occurrence on an annual basis. And then sensitivity is specific more to an asset type, and it's the expected outage from exposure to a given threat. And then consequence is specific to an asset, and this is where the dependency with the CLKC comes into play. On this slide, you can see the hazards that were studied in the risk assessment. So coastal flooding and erosion, tsunami, earthquake, high winds, inland and coastal flooding, landslide and rockfall, wildfire. And then we also looked at human caused elements as well as cyber attack, fuel disruption, error, malfunction, and pandemic. This is the sensitivity matrix. So again, it looks more generically at asset types and the impacts of various hazards. So for example, if you look at overhead transmission lines, they can be heavily affected by high winds. So you can see it would get a score of 3, while flooding would have limited impact, hence the score of 1. Next, we looked at consequence, and consequence scores were independent and not related to any of the hazards. Instead, they focused again on the criticality of the assets and how any loss of any individual node, what we'd see in terms of impacts to CLKC. And so we took the CLKC prioritization from the inventory, and that allowed us to use the criticality of the CLKC to develop CEI consequence scores. So here are some results. Some of the top assets by total risk score were some pipelines that move petroleum, some higher voltage transmission lines that stem from one of the larger Oahu power plants, a key marine import terminal, and a key jet fuel terminal. And so one thing I'd want to note is that the assessment, because it was geospatial, things like pipelines and transmission lines that run through different hazard areas tended to have a higher score as a result. On the right-hand side, you can see a pie chart that breaks down the percent of total risk by hazard. And the blue areas are both flooding types. And then the green area is wildfire. And kind of an interesting story was we were doing this back in May of 23. And when these results were shown, most people were a little bit surprised because they felt that some of the higher risks tend to be the high winds or storms that we get here in Hawaii, as well as the threat of tsunami, but those actually scored much lower, as you can see here by the chart. Finally, we wanted to put together a risk mitigation approach. And so given the risk assessment results, we developed a risk mitigation approach that involved first determining mitigation goals and objectives. We had a goals and objectives workshop with stakeholders, and you can see here we came out with 4 high-level goals that are fairly consistent with state policy. So goal 1, reduce occurrence and duration of energy service disruptions by reducing system vulnerability to hazards. Goal 2, promote actions to prepare Oahu's energy system for climate change. 3, mitigate risks of the energy system that serves community lifelines. Again, the emphasis on community lifelines. And then goal 4, support Hawaii's clean energy structure and transition to renewable energy through modernized grid infrastructure. After that, we developed a list of 28 mitigation measures, and these came from industry expertise, from a lot of discussions with stakeholders, including the private sector and government. And they generally fell into these 3 buckets: strengthening against and resisting potential hazards, absorbing impacts when hazards strike, and then also planning and policy measures. Next, as I mentioned, we wanted to develop a framework so that we could evaluate and prioritize measures and projects. So we asked, does the measure help to achieve more than one goal? Does the measure have support? Does the measure promote equity? Is the measure likely to be implemented? All of these things would be important when selecting to move forward with a project. Oh, and does the measure address multiple hazards? We also conducted a capabilities assessment, which is essentially an inventorying of what the community is capable of doing. So what kind of plans exist, what existing programs and projects are out there, what kind of funding is there, but also just personnel that are available with different entities. And so we're really looking for gaps, and so that we could try to fill those gaps in our capabilities. And then finally, we developed an implementation plan. So for each of the measures, we really wanted to understand what the next steps would be, who are the key partners, what are the funding opportunities, what are the benefits, et cetera. And so we had basically an implementation worksheet filled out for all 28 measures. So now getting to the Geospatial Decision Support System, or GDSS. As mentioned, this is really one of the primary deliverables of the project. And it's essentially a map-based ArcGIS tool. And unfortunately, because it contains a lot of sensitive data, I can't do a live demo of the tool. But I can show you a few high-level screenshots so you can understand how it would function. Oh, I should note that at present, the only end users are with the State Energy Office, HIEMA, and the Office of Homeland Security. And it's basically been used mostly around energy security planning. So the GDSS has two sides. There's an infrastructure hazards tab, and then there's also a dependencies tab. And so the second tab, the dependencies tab, used ArcGIS Insights and the link analysis tool to visualize relationships, which was fairly novel for this project. So this is the first tab, the infrastructure hazards tab. You can see, it's like any other mapping application, shows what assets there are. You can group the assets by type. There's color coding done by the risk level that was determined in the assessment. You can click on and off all of the layers that were used, in particular CEI, CLKC, hazards, and any other demographic data. The left-hand frame kind of highlights the CEI by type and gives some additional information. And then if that's not enough, you can also use the caret at bottom of the frame, and that would pull up a table with all of the data that is behind this. On the Dependencies Insights tab, this is, again, so you can explore the relationships between nodes. So if you click on one node, you can see the upstream and downstream nodes. In this case, this has the Par East refinery highlighted, and you can see that it is dependent upon the single point mooring, but also has connections to some terminals. Color coding on this one shows different systems. So there's the electric, liquid fuel, and gas systems. And you can filter by asset type, search by names, and see highlighted nodes in the map on the right-hand side. So next steps, that was all focused on Oahu. That was Advanced Assistance 1.0. And now we're also looking at getting funding for a 2.0 project that will include Kauai, Maui, and Hawaii counties. And then the GDSS is being utilized really as a platform. So the energy sector kind of went first, and OHS is intending to use it as a platform to engage with other sectors so that we can better protect critical infrastructure. And that's about it. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, John. Right now, I believe we also have our executive director on in our meeting.
Great.
Our executive director is Dr. Carl Kim. Would you like to share a few words, Dr. Kim? Okay. Maybe not yet. But meanwhile, we did have a handful of questions that came in through our chat feature. First is from Jeff Rubin. For wildfire hazard, did you include potential need for PSPS, either as hazard component or consequence, or just disruptions related to damage?
That's a good question. That's obviously been a conversation that has been taking place since Maui. I don't think it was actually one of our mitigation measures that we identified, though.
I actually wasn't talking about it as a mitigation measure. I was talking about it as assessing either the hazard or the consequence, because if it may actually be a mitigation measure, but bottom line is you're cutting off power to a group of end users, and that's going to have the same effect as if it went down as a result of the actual hazard. They may get some warning, but they're still without power. So did you incorporate that into wildfire? Means we may have to have a intentional cutoff of power as well as a potential direct damage induced cutoff.
Right. I don't think it was included, but I mean, certainly the tool itself will give some insights as to what the impacts would be should a PSPS be needed at any of those CEI nodes. Hope that answers your question.
Thanks.
We have another question from Kira Howe. Were risk drivers considered at all in the risk assessment?
For risk drivers?
Yes. Kira, are you online if you'd like to clarify your question?
Yeah, I just meant like the individual kind of factors that can contribute to the risk of, wildfire or flooding or any of those disasters.
Yeah, so the risk, again, is exposure times sensitivity times the consequence. And so the risk score essentially has that already bundled in terms of it being exposed to one of those threats that we looked at.
Okay. Let's see, we have one from Yume Wang. Did you attempt to quantify the costs of the mitigation measures, for example, in ranges, low costs, moderate costs?
Yeah, so that was definitely something that was included in the implementation worksheets. So they looked at generally how much is this going to cost and where can we potentially get funding for implementation of that measure.
Thanks. This is Yume. Can we get more information on the 28 measures? Mitigation?
Yeah, so as we've been talking more and more about this project, of course, people are interested in seeing the final report, kind of in the process of sanitizing it. again, because there was a fair amount of sensitive data that was involved in the analysis. But I think once that's done, we'll be posting it probably to our website.
That's fantastic. I'm wondering how much detail there is in the costs, the mitigation costs, like, you know, for tsunami with the low-lying facility. Did you consider elevating the facility and how much it would cost by square footage, or, you know, protect it with kind of retaining deflection structures? I mean, how do we, could you just describe some of the mitigation measures that you
Sure.
favored? Yeah, thanks.
All right. Let me pull up the sorry, just give me a moment. So you're interested specifically in tsunami?
I'm interested in all of the hazards, coastal flooding, so it looked like you did coastal flooding, but also like inland pluvial flooding. And like, did you use 100-year flood maps or and come up with mitigation measures for those? You can just provide any example you want. I guess you have
Sure.
flooding as like a critical. Yeah.
So most of the hazard layers that we use, we're trying to be consistent with many of the mitigation plans that are already out there, both the state and county mitigation plans. And so we did use, again, like the 100-year floodplain maps, for example.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
Oh.
I'm trying to my the
You're trying to
document.
pull out, okay.
Kind
And
of a
then,
big document, so
oh,
taking
a
Yeah.
while, okay. So
Yeah.
meanwhile, we'll just move to our our next question from Jim Dixon. He asks about social impacts, and I also have Colton Ching raising his hand. So I just wanted to let you know that I did take notice, and we have you in the queue for questions. So Jim is asking about social impacts. If Jim, you wanted to like unmute yourself and clarify your question.
It's just a simple question.
Mhm.
How does the model consider potential social impacts of mitigation measures and you know, and those as potential costs?
Yeah, so the way that the social impacts are built in, I'd say, is at the CLKC level. And so we prioritize the CLKC based on, you know, the population they serve, and then also using the social vulnerability index based on those polygons of service areas for CLKC. And so I think in that regard it is, but I don't think we looked at the social impacts at the implementation level.
Thank you.
Now we have a question by Mary Sheridan. Have you considered adding space weather events? And how interesting is, because we'll be talking about space weather in our next third Thursday scheduled for February. So again, Mary's question is, have you considered adding space weather events? Some of these lifelines can be quite affected.
We did not, but actually now that we have Advanced Assistance 2.0 coming, I think there is an opportunity to rebuild the list of hazards that we look at. Thank you for that, though. It's a good suggestion.
We also have an anonymous participant. How long did the overall project take?
It took about 1.5 years. There was a lot of engagement upfront, obviously, with the critical energy infrastructure owners, and getting surveys back from the CLKC and reaching out to sectors that were a little less responsive and making sure that we had good coverage.
Okay. And then
Also,
I'll let
don't forget
Colton go ahead and ask his question. You can unmute yourself, Colton.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. And I apologize. I'm joining by mobile, so I wasn't able to type my question in. So John, I think I heard you say earlier that from a risk standpoint, you're looking both at the consequence or magnitude of an impact as well as the probability. Is that right? Is that recollection right?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks for that confirmation. So from a probability standpoint, how did you do a probabilistic assessment of the different hazards and sort of the magnitude of an event? That's a really tough thing to do. I'm just curious how you guys did that.
It is a very tough thing to do. So essentially, I don't know if I'm going to be good to explain this one, but we looked at the probability of the occurrence on an annual basis. And so, for example, if it's a 100-year flood, then it would be a 1% chance annually. And then we looked at the probability that it would occur between now and 2050. And so kind of aggregating up each of those individual years, and you get a percentage chance that it would happen by 2050.
And you did that by location?
We did that by
or just over
hazard. Oh yeah, and overlaid with the CEI and the CLKC.
Okay, and then so part of this was looking at different potential mitigations and the impact. So on the mitigation side, you looked at both the mitigation's ability to reduce the magnitude or severity of an impact, as well as to reduce the probability of an event impacting that infrastructure?
No, we didn't go that far with the mitigations. So essentially, we did a risk assessment, came out with the highest risk assets, and then we designed mitigation measures to address those assets, but it didn't say by how much the risk is mitigated by.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for enduring my questions, John.
Sure, thanks.
Okay, Kara's asking, will the PUC eventually be given access to the GDSS?
Yeah, so we briefed the PUC on the project. I think they are interested in using the GDSS, but obviously we have, again, to work through a lot of sensitivity with the data, and making sure that the users who use the GDSS and are under the proper NDAs and whatnot, have a purpose to view the data.
Okay.
That's actually something. So again, our partnership with OHS is housing the GDSS. And so because they have a longer term project that intends to include several other sectors, lifeline sectors, they'll be kind of taking over at least the access to the GDSS moving forward.
Okay. We have a question by Amy. Can you or will you be using Engage or Haven to model different potential disaster scenarios?
No, thank you for talking about Engage and Haven though. Since those are out of the energy office, we did not consider that.
So maybe it's something possibly in the future.
maybe something in the future.
Yeah. So I know Cyrus had asked for like a copy of the presentation. I'm sure that John can provide us with it and we can share it with everyone, as well as, viewing this presentation on our YouTube channel. More questions to come. We have one from Nini. Will you provide the GDSS tool to all stakeholders and input entities?
No. Would be
Okay.
the short answer.
Okay.
Again, there's protections on some of the data, even if it's your data. There's still other sensitive data as well that we wouldn't be able to share.
Okay. And so I believe Jeff is just sharing the PSPS is the Public Safety Power Shut Off. Just to clarify that. And we have Dr. Carl Kim just sending a chat over to us. Excellent, informative presentation. Thank you for sharing with us. Can you talk a bit more about validation and updating of the data given new growth and development?
Yeah, so I think moving forward with this project, I mean, this is something that the system's changing all the time. Better data sets are coming out all the time. It is probably something that's going to need to be updated every few years. And so, we'll look to continue trying to find funding to make sure that we can keep this tool as relevant as possible.
We have another question by Kira. Any reason why volcanic activity was not included in the quantitative risk assessment? Because, we live on a
Right.
with
So because this is an Oahu specific project, we didn't feel that volcanic activity was enough of a threat to warrant doing it for this project. But I think Advanced Assistance 2.0 with the other islands will certainly include volcano, at least for Big Island.
Abby has a question. Not sure if I missed it, but were the qualitative threats included in the deliverables?
Yeah, so it's more of a section in the final report, and it's a narrative about each of those threats. It didn't get into the analysis like the natural hazards did.
Okay. Nini is asking if we could provide a list of participants and their companies, government departments when we provide the recording. I'll work it out with Mel. She'll be able to assist in that area. Mel, do you have an answer for that question?
I'll answer.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone who would like to share their contact information can put it in the chat and we'll send the chat out at the end of the recording. Well, at the end of the session with the recording link.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. Okay, we have Yume again. With the mitigation measures, cost questions, would you please follow up with details after the webinar via she's providing her email address for the information.
I can throw my email address as well into the chat.
Okay, thank you. And Jeff wants the information as well.
Yeah, we can reply directly to you, John, or if there's just a way to share that more broadly, that would be great, because I think it could apply to a lot of different mitigation planning processes. Thanks. And
then Mary is making a comment here. FEMA has an excellent course on preparing the nation for space weather events. IS0066. I recommend it. Following the Space Weather Prediction Center dashboard should be highly considered. Thank you for that heads up, Mary. Okay. Amy's question with regards to questions in the chat. Yes, we do have that information. Nini is sharing her information from Hawaiian Electric. And I think that's all the questions that we have so far in the chat. Do you have anyone with any additional follow-up questions for clarification or new questions that they would like to ask John?
May we stop screen sharing? And and then I wanted to thank John on behalf of our center. Again, I apologize. I've had some technical difficulties as we have in this format, but I want to, on behalf of the center and all the participants in today's session, I want to thank you for a really interesting and informative presentation. And I do have some ideas of some further work that we might work on. Some years ago, we did a project where we took basically consumer and household and business expenditure data. We have very detailed input-output tables for the state of Hawaii. And we were able to then estimate, based upon various geospatial characteristics, the amount of power consumption, the spending. And I think that so one way of sort of validating some of this may be to link this to information about electric bills and power consumption and so forth. And so that was part of the question that I was asking related to approaches to validating this. And then I think if this tool is very powerful in terms of understanding the underlying exposure and risk instead of the entire island, but at specific locations. And so that's something that I think we would like to follow up with and share some of the work that we've done in the past that's, I think, relevant to this really good work that you're doing.
Hey, Carl, was part of that info, did any of that include who has subsidies or who has subsidized utility bills as a potential indicator for vulnerability?
Oh, we could do that too, but we didn't delve that deeply into this. I mean, this was more an effort to try to integrate, the input, output, and household and business spending information, and then other indicators like number of employees or amount of sales and so forth. So there are these multipliers that we can use to basically estimate or share the level of activity that that might be useful in terms of validating some of this in terms of the underlying exposure and risk levels.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Carl, this is Kirsten. Unfortunately, I apologize, everyone. I'm having technical difficulties, so I'm on Amy's screen. I just want to comment on that because when I was with the Energy Office, and hi, John, I'm so proud of you and so proud of the work that you've been doing. I think it's fantastic. We were not able to get, this was one of the efforts of the Energy Equity Hui to identify where those subsidies are. And that's one of the things that Equity Hui has been working on is, and particularly in collaboration with other states, is how to identify where those subsidies are because of the personal information, protection of personal information. And so that's always a huge challenge. But that's something with the LIHEAP program, with the low income energy assistance program, that has been an ongoing effort. And so that I just wanted to make you aware that we at the Energy Office has been working on those issues through the Equity Hui and with other states that have approached this in a variety of ways.
Okay, with that, once again, I do want to thank you very much for a most informative, timely presentation, and hope that we can continue to share information about the different methods and tools, and then also get to the point where we can exchange some data, and continue to build these important systems. So once again, thank you very much for a really great and useful presentation.